Studio lights were bright that afternoon. They shined down from the ceiling like small suns, warming the stage and making everything look perfect for television. The audience sat in neat rows, smiling and whispering to each other while the crew members moved quickly around the stage. Cameras rolled into place. A producer counted down quietly. 5, 4, 3. The red recording light turned on. The audience burst into applause. Sherri Shepherd walked onto the stage with her usual confident energy. She waved to the crowd, her smile wide and warm. The audience loved her, and they showed it with loud cheers. "Welcome back to the show," she said happily. The clapping slowly faded as she sat down in her chair. Across from her was another chair, waiting. And in that chair sat Jeannie Mai. Jeannie wore a simple but elegant outfit. Her posture was straight, and her hands were resting quietly in her lap. To anyone watching on television, she looked calm. But inside, her heart was beating faster than normal. 7 years. It had been 7 long years since she had sat across from Sherri like this. 7 years since everything changed. The audience was excited to see the two women together again. Many of them remembered when they used to work side by side on television. Back then, they laughed together on screen and looked like the best of friends. But today, something felt different. There was a small space between their chairs. It wasn't very large, but it somehow felt bigger than the entire stage. Sherri turned toward Jeannie with a friendly smile. "Jeannie," she said warmly, "it's so good to have you here again." The audience clapped again. Jeannie nodded politely. "Thank you for inviting me," she replied. Her voice was calm and gentle. But there was something careful about it. Like someone choosing every word very slowly. Sherri laughed lightly. "I feel like it's been forever since we've sat together like this." Jeannie gave a small smile. "Yes," she said quietly. "It really has." The audience expected them to laugh about old memories. That's what reunion interviews usually looked like. Happy stories, funny moments. But Jeannie stayed still. Her hands were folded together tightly in her lap. Her fingers pressed against each other as if she were holding something inside. Her eyes slowly moved around the studio. The cameras, the lights, the audience. It all looked familiar. Too familiar. For a brief moment, her mind drifted back in time. 7 years ago, she had walked through a very similar studio hallway. The same bright lights. The same busy crew members running from one place to another. Back then, she had felt excited to come to work. Back then, she had trusted the people around her. Especially Sherri. They had shared dressing rooms and late-night talks before filming. They laughed together about small mistakes on live television. Sometimes they stayed after the show ended, sitting quietly and talking about life. At least, that's what Jeannie believed their friendship was. She slowly blinked and brought her thoughts back to the present. Sherri was talking to the audience again. "We have so many memories together," Sherri said with a playful laugh. Behind-the-scenes stories that people never heard. The audience laughed along. Jeannie nodded slightly, but she didn't add anything. The host noticed the silence. For a second, Sherri's smile tightened just a little. But she quickly returned to her cheerful tone. "You know," she said, turning toward Jeannie, "people have always been curious about something." Jeannie looked at her. "What's that?" she asked softly. Sherri leaned forward slightly, holding her cue cards. "When you left the show back then, it was very sudden." A quiet murmur moved through the audience. Everyone remembered that moment. One day Jeannie was there. The next day, she was gone. No goodbye episode, no clear explanation, just silence. For years, fans online tried to guess what had happened. Some people believed Jeannie left because she was tired of television. Others said she had a disagreement with producers. A few rumors said there had been tension between the hosts. But no one had ever confirmed the truth. Even today, it remained a mystery. Sherri continued speaking carefully. "You never really talked about that time," she said. "And I think a lot of viewers always wondered what happened." Jeannie didn't answer right away. She simply watched Sherri's face. The studio suddenly felt very quiet. The lights above them hummed softly. Somewhere behind the cameras, a crew member shifted their weight. Jeannie's heart beat a little harder. 7 years ago, she had left this world suddenly. 7 years ago, she believed something that changed everything. Something that made her walk away from a job she loved. Something that made her feel betrayed. For years, she had carried that memory quietly. But today was different. Today she was sitting across from the person who started it all. Sherri smiled again, though her eyes searched Jeannie's face. "So," she asked gently, "why did you leave so suddenly back then?" The question hung in the air. The audience leaned forward slightly. Some people held their breath. Jeannie looked down at her hands for a moment. Her fingers slowly relaxed. Then she looked up again. Her eyes met Sherri's. For a second, the room felt frozen. Then Jeannie let out a soft laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh. It sounded more like someone remembering something painful. "You really want to ask that question, here?" she said quietly. The tone of her voice made several people in the audience shift in their seats. Sherri blinked. "Well," she said lightly, trying to keep the mood calm, "I think our viewers deserve the truth." Jeannie studied her face carefully. 7 years had passed, but some expressions never changed. Jeannie slowly nodded. "Yes," she said, "they definitely do." The audience became completely silent. The stage lights shone down on both women. And somewhere deep inside, the story that had been buried for 7 years was finally beginning to surface. The studio suddenly felt much quieter than before. Only a few minutes earlier, the audience had been laughing and clapping. The atmosphere had been light and cheerful, like any normal television interview. But now something had changed. The energy in the room was different. Heavy. Jeannie leaned back slowly in her chair. Her shoulders were relaxed, but her eyes were focused on Sherri. She watched every small movement on her face. Across from her, Sherri was still holding her cue cards. But she wasn't looking at them anymore. Her eyes stayed on Jeannie. The audience could feel the tension building between the two women. Jeannie took a slow breath. "Do you remember the last day we spoke backstage?" she asked quietly. Her voice was calm, but it carried clearly through the silent studio. Sherri blinked. Her smile returned, but it looked slightly forced. "That was a long time ago," she said. "A lot has happened since then." Jeannie nodded slowly. "Yes," she replied, "a lot has." For a moment she looked down, as if remembering something. But then she lifted her eyes again. "But I remember it clearly." Those words made the room even quieter. A few people in the audience shifted in their seats. Jeannie continued speaking, her voice steady. "You came into my dressing room," she said. The memory appeared in her mind as if it had happened yesterday. The narrow hallway behind, the stage, the soft buzzing of fluorescent lights. Her dressing room door opening slowly. "You closed the door behind you," Jeannie continued. Sherri's fingers tightened around her cue cards. "You looked nervous," Jeannie added. The host laughed lightly, trying to keep the mood relaxed. "I mean, we had many conversations backstage," Sherri said quickly. "It's hard to remember every one." Jeannie tilted her head slightly. "Really?" Her tone wasn't angry. It was something quieter, something colder. "You told me something that day," Jeannie continued. Sherri shifted in her chair. "I'm not sure where this is going," she said with a polite smile. "You told me someone on the show couldn't be trusted." A soft murmur spread through the audience. Sherri immediately shook her head. "I don't remember saying that." Jeannie watched her carefully. "You don't." Her voice stayed calm. Too calm. The cameras moved closer, capturing every expression. Jeannie leaned forward slightly now. "You told me the producers were planning to replace me." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Sherri laughed quickly. "That's not true." But Jeannie continued speaking. "You said they believed I was too emotional for television." Her voice didn't shake, but there was pain hidden deep inside it. "And you said," she added slowly, "that you were the only person warning me." Sherri's smile faded. Her eyes moved briefly toward the audience, then back to Jeannie. "Jeannie," she said carefully, "I think you may be remembering things differently." Jeannie sat quietly for a moment. Then she nodded. "That's what I thought too." The words came out softly. "For 7 years," she added. The audience listened without making a sound. Some people leaned forward slightly. Others looked back and forth between the two women. Jeannie's mind slowly drifted back to that moment 7 years ago. She could still remember the feeling in her stomach that day. Confusion, fear, shock. Back then, she had trusted Sherri completely. When Sherri walked into her dressing room that afternoon, Jeannie thought she was coming to chat like usual. But instead, the conversation had been different. Sherri had closed the door carefully and lowered her voice. "I heard something today," she had said. Jeannie remembered how serious her face looked. "What do you mean?" Jeannie had asked. Sherri had looked around the room first, as if someone might be listening. Then she said the words that changed everything. "The producers think you're too emotional for TV," she had whispered. Jeannie had felt her chest tighten. "What?" she had asked. "They're planning to replace you soon," Sherri had said. The memory still felt sharp even after all those years. Back in the studio, Jeannie blinked slowly and returned to the present. "After you told me that," she continued, "I walked into a meeting with the producers." Sherri's face stayed very still. The audience listened closely. "They looked confused," Jeannie said. She paused for a moment, as if they had no idea what I was talking about. Sherri quickly responded, "Well, misunderstandings happen in this business all the time." Jeannie nodded again. "Yes," she said softly. "They do." Her eyes stayed locked on Sherri. "But misunderstandings usually don't come from emails." The sentence hung in the air. Sherri's expression changed instantly, just for a second, but the cameras caught it. "What do you mean?" Sherri asked. Jeannie slowly reached down beside her chair. Her bag rested on the floor. The sound of the zipper opening seemed louder than normal in the quiet studio. Several people in the audience leaned forward. Jeannie reached inside and pulled out a single printed paper. The white page looked simple, but the way she held it made it feel heavy. "And misunderstandings," Jeannie continued calmly, "don't usually come from this." She placed the paper on the table between them. The sound of the paper touching the table echoed in the quiet room. Sherri's eyes dropped down. For the first time since the interview began, the confident host looked unsure. Her face slowly lost its color. The audience noticed. No one spoke. The studio lights still shined brightly above them. But suddenly the stage felt colder. Jeannie rested her hands on the table. Her voice stayed steady, but inside, memories from 7 years ago were finally reaching the surface. And the truth that had been hidden all that time was now sitting right in front of them.